All right, Daf Kof Dalid and into Kof He, and completing Masechet Eruvin today. So we start with this Mishnah, where the theme here we're speaking about things that were permitted in the Bet Hamikdash, but not anywhere else. Special leniencies for the sake of the Bet Hamikdash. So one of them is as follows: Boskin melach al gabe kebesh bishvil shelo yachaliku. There was a ramp, a steep ramp that went up to up the mizbeach that the kohanim would have to go up, and it could be slippery, maybe when it was raining, and so you're allowed to put salt, scatter salt onto it, so that it will grip and not be so slippery. וממלאים מבוד הגולה, מבוד הגדול, בגלגל בשבת, ומבאר היכר ביום טוב. Generally, not allowed to draw water on Shabbat from a well, but in these cases, they permitted it. So there's three of them. Bod Hagadol, the cistern or well of the exiles, and from the great well, and using a water wheel. You can draw water, but not with a water wheel on Shabbat, except for these three, they were allowed to use a water wheel. And also from one called the Heked well. We'll see why they're called why they're called that. The first two are in the Bet HaMikdash. Here, you see this chamber that's on the side. If you look at the picture on the northern side, you have this one with the blue roof is called the exile chamber, and that's where these cisterns were. Okay, and so they could even use a water wheel. Normally, you just have to do it by hand. Okay, so that's the Mishnah, right? The ramps and the water wheel. So let's see. The Gemara says, "Rameh le Rav Ika mi Fashronya le Rava." So this rabbi is going to bring up two sources that seem to contradict each other. The first one is our Mishnah, Tanan, Boskin melach al gabeh hakevesh, b'shvil shelo yachaliku, b'mikdash in b'medina la. So that means you can put salt in the Bet HaMikdash on the ramp. That's permitted, but only in the Bet HaMikdash, special permission. But if you want to do that at home, that would be a problem. Minhu chaser shenitkalela nitkalkela b'meh geshamim biteben umradeh ba. If you have a courtyard and it's a lot of rain, it got damaged, and the rain is soaking everything there, so you can bring some straw and put it around. The straw will absorb the water, and that's permitted. So what's the difference? Why is it prohibited from putting salt on the floor and permitted to put straw on the floor? Okay, I mean, you might think about putting salt on the sidewalk when it snows. We'll see if the problems that we have here apply to that. I think probably not. Here, we'll see in a second. Well, straw is different because you're not negating it. You're not going to leave it there. You're putting the straw there to absorb the water, but the straw is not ruined. You can still use it to feed the animals or to make building blocks out of it, bricks out of it. So still usable. So therefore, you're putting it there, but you can take it back. Whereas for the salt, when you're putting the salt there, you're not going to use that salt anymore. Once it's on the floor and people step on it, you're not going to put it on your salad. So therefore, the salt, actually, you're building another layer on top of the floor, and that's the problem that it's building. I think when we put salt out today, we're putting it on concrete, and so it washes away. No one thinks it's going to be there, so it's not any kind of permanent kind of building that's going to add another layer. When they were doing it, they were putting it on something softer, maybe a soil. So I think that's different from what we do. Okay, so anyway, that's the difference. That straw is allowed and salt is not allowed. So, and when they do it in the Bet HaMikdash, what do they have in mind when they put the salt down? If they are renouncing the salt and just nullifying it, they say we're going to leave it there. That is a problem because then they're building another layer in the Bet HaMikdash, and you can't just add things. You can't go and make an extension in the Bet HaMikdash without the proper procedure. And the pasuk we learn it from is in Divrei Yamim. Over here, this is when King David is giving his son, King Solomon, the plans of all of the Bet HaMikdash and all the silverware and everything. And he says he gave all this that God gave me, understanding by his hand on me. I give you in writing the plan and all the works. In other words, you got to follow the architectural plan, and you can't change it and add to it. And if you're going to put salt there and leave it there, then you are adding to what's the existing plan. So you can't leave it there. And if you don't negate the salt, in other words, that you don't want it to stay there, then it's also a problem, because then it's a chatzitza. The kohen has to be walking up the ramp with his feet, and his feet have to be touching the ramp. He can't be a separation between them. So therefore, if you put the salt and you don't actually want the salt to remain there, then it's going to be a chatzitza. So you see, it's a problem either way. So how could the Mishnah say that you're allowed to put salt on the ramp? We'll have two answers. One, we're only talking about when he goes up the ramp to bring the limbs of the animal, which is not an essential part of the service, and so he doesn't actually have to be touching it. So we're following the second one, that he is not intending to leave it there. And yes, it is a chatzitza, but he only puts it there for a part of the service that's not essential. The part of that is essential is bring the blood up and sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach. For that part, when he's carrying the blood up, okay, then he can't put the salt. But if he's only carrying the limbs to burn them, that's not as important. Okay, then we ask, hold on, is it really not so important to bring the limbs and burn them up? Pasuk says he brings everything, all the parts of the animal, and he burns them on the mizbeach. So you see that is an essential part of the service. So rather, we change the answer. We say it's when you carrying the wood up. There were lots of different piles of wood up on the mizbeach, and they had to keep going all the time. They had to keep bringing wood. But that wood, it's an essential part of the service to have fire there, but actually bringing the wood is not important. He doesn't have to be touching the altar, the ramp, while he's bringing up the wood. So that's when they would put the salt, but they wouldn't put salt when he's bringing up the blood or the parts of the animal. Okay, now Rabbah would give a darasha once. When it says darash Rabbah, doesn't mean only that he taught it privately, means he taught it publicly when everybody was gathered, probably on Shabbat for an official lecture. And so anything you teach in a public lecture like that becomes official halacha l'maaseh. So he taught. What we quoted earlier, that a courtyard gets a lot of rain, it's all swampy. You can bring straw and put it around, and that's permitted. It'll soak up the water. Okay. After that, we have a braita that gives a limitation. Yes, you can scatter straw, but you can't do it in a normal way. You can't just take a basket of straw and spread it around, or a box. But rather, you have to use the bottom of the box. In other words, turn it upside down and just put the straw on there. So you do it in an unusual way. And you didn't teach that, Rabbi. You just said you're allowed to put the straw like in a normal way. So what you taught was not correct. So hadar okim Rabba amora alev edarash devarim shamati deftechem ta'ut hen biyadi v'ram kach amru mishum Rabbi Eliezer. So Rava accepted that criticism, and then he had to give another dirasha, and he set up an amora. Amora means either a translator, but in this case, not translating to a different language, but rather a loudspeaker. That was the customary way to give a lecture, that the rabbi wouldn't get up and scream. They didn't have loudspeakers, so he would just talk in a low voice, and then someone else would announce it with a loud voice. But you only do that when you have an official public lecture that you need that. So that shows that in order to correct himself, he had to make another public lecture called a pirka. And he said, oh, listen, what I told you the other day was a mistake. In fact, you are allowed to scatter, but you have to do it in an unusual way by using the bottom of the basket, not the regular basket. Okay, good. Now, Mishnah said, furthermore, Mimali'in mibor hagola, that you can draw water from the cistern of the exiles using a water wheel. Okay, now this is going to get into the reason why drawing the water itself, if you're not carrying it, is not a problem. So it seems that the problem with in this case is it makes a lot of noise. These water wheels would be very noisy, and there's an ancient halacha that the Shabbat should be a day of rest and a day of quiet, and not a day of that has a lot of noise. Back in Masechet Shabbat, we saw that when Bishimon's mom was talking too much, she would say, "Mom, it's Shabbat, right? Be quiet." So that's an ancient halacha that not to make a lot of noise, especially percussion types of noises. Okay, that's what we're going to discuss, and that's Ulah's opinion. And we're going to see Rabba's opinion is that musical noise is the only thing that's not allowed, because then you're going to come and play an instrument, and the instrument will break, and you're going to tie a knot and fix the string. So these are two different opinions, and we're going to try to go back and forth and see who's right. Is it making noise, noisy noise, or is musical noise the problem? And therefore, if it's just random noise, it's okay. All right, so let's see the discussion. This is the main place where it's discussed. Ula ikla lebe Rab Menashe. Ata hu gabra teraf ababa. Amar man hai litchal gufe deka mechil le shabeta. So Ula went to visit one time with Rab Menashe, and someone came and knocked on the door on Shabbat. And so Ula, who was actually only visiting, says, "Who is that?" Right? And he cursed the person. He says, "This person is violating Shabbat. May his body be violated. May be desecrated." I guess wishing him to die. Okay, so this is the Talmudic version of a knock knock joke, right? Knock knock. Who's there? I hope he dies because he violated Shabbat. For what? Just for knocking on the door, because that's making a lot of noise, and Shabbat should be restful. Okay, this is not musical noise, right? This is just any noise. All right, so then Amal le Rabba tells colleague Ula, lo asru ela kol shel shir. No, not just any noise, only musical noise is prohibited. Even though it sounds nice, because then you'll fix an instrument. Itibeh abaye ma'alin b'diofe umatifin miyarak lachole b'shabbat. Abaye challenges his teacher on this because he says we have a halacha that you can take this diofe. Diofe is a combination word. Diotu pe, two mouths. In other words, a tube. You're allowed to take some kind of tube or a siphon and have it drip from one vessel to another for an ill person. So you can use a siphon or a drip from this mi'arak or something like this. You would fill it with water, and then it would have it would drip down. When you take your finger off, it would drip down, and you put a metal plate under it, and then it would make sounds like chimes. And so this is something that makes noise, right? And it says here that it is permitted for a sick person to help the sick person. So that means you're allowed to do it for a sick person, otherwise not. It's special permission. So this is something that's prohibited. Now, what case? How does it help the sick person? Must be the sick person is sleeping and you want to wake him up, right? And get him, get him active. And so therefore you're making noise. So you're going to use these noisemakers on Shabbat. And you see that noisemakers are not permitted, even though it's not musical noise, just any noise is not allowed. So that's a question to Rabbah, because Rabbah said only music is prohibited. But here we see that other noisy things are prohibited. So Rabbah, how are you going to answer that? Right? Don't we learn from here that making any noise is prohibited? He says no. No, the sick person is awake and we want him to sleep. So we make a nice pleasant noise. It's a pleasant noise to hear the drops falling, right? Like it sounds like rain, kind of a pleasant white noise, or chimes, and that's melodious. And so that's the reason why, yes, it's permitted for an ill person, but it's not allowed for a good well person. And generally, it's not allowed because it's making musical sound. Okay, so the Baal is able to answer that, but we have another question. Abaye asks, "Hamishamer perotav mipnei ha'afot udla'av mipnei ha'chaya mishamer kedarko b'Shabbat." The Tosefta says you're allowed to be a guard to guard your fruits from birds and to coming, or you could guard your gourds animals that may come and eat them, and you can guard them the same way you guard them normally. You guard them on Shabbat. You stand over them. ובלבד שלא יספק ולא יתהפך ולא ירקד כדרך שעושים בכל. So now generally during the week, if a bird comes or an animal comes, you'll either clap to scare it away, or bang on your body, on your thighs to scare it away, or stamp your feet. Yiraked. Yiraked could mean to dance, but it could also mean to here it doesn't mean to dance. You're not dancing to scare away the birds, but rather you're stomping your feet to get them away. Now, when you're doing this is just noise, right? You're not making dancing to a beat. All right, you're just making noise to get the birds and the animals away. And so it says you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. What do you see here? That the prohibition is about making noise, not about making music. So this is a support for Ula, a question on Rabbah. What's the reason? This is because making noise, and therefore you see any noise is not allowed. Question to Rabbah. No, that's not the reason. The reason why you can't scare away the birds is because if you start clapping and stomping and it doesn't work, then the next step is you're going to pick up a little rock and throw it at or nearby to make noise, or to scare it away in that way. And that is a problem because it's mukseh, and then you're throwing it. Maybe it's maybe that would be carrying also. And that's the reason why you can't do it, not because it's making noise. Okay, that doesn't seem to be the pshat of the Tosefta, but we're fitting it into Rabbah. So you see, the older sources actually support Ula, that's making noise, but Rabbah updates it to making music. Okay. Ve'ela hada amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav nashim mesachakot be'egozim asur. My ta'ama lav dekamolid kala v'chol kala asir. So we have another statement by Rav that the women are not allowed to play with nuts. This was a game that they used to play in the olden days, to take a nut and drop it down a ramp, and they would have to hit the other nuts, and whoever hits the most wins. Okay, like an ancient shuffleboard or something, or jacks. I don't know. So what's the problem with this? It makes a lot of noise when they bang into each other. So you see, it's not musical noise, right? It's just annoying noise, and that's why it's prohibited, right? So that's a question to Rabbah. It says La dilma gumot. The reason why you can't play this game is not because of noise, but rather because you're going to smooth out the floor. You want the nuts to roll nicely, and if the floor, which is made out of dirt, has holes in it and gets stuck, so you're going to smooth it out. If that's indoors, that's called building, and so that's why it's a gezerah that you might come to that. All right, that's typical of the Bavli to take an old ancient law and formulate it as a gezerah. Okay, so dilo temahachi, and actually in this case it makes sense. Ha damar Rav Yehuda nashim mesachakot betapuchim asur hatamai olude kala ika ela dilma atel ashvuye gumot. Because furthermore, there's a similar halacha that women who play with apples is not allowed. Sounds like a similar game, except with apples. But apples don't make noise when they knock into each other. So what noise is there? Why should it be a problem? Rather, you see that there is a different problem with this game, which is that you're going to make the floor level. All right, we resolved that one. And now this is the reason why we brought this whole discussion here, because it quotes our Mishnah. Tanan. So you see that you're allowed to use the water wheels in the Bet HaMikdash, these two. So that only in the Bet HaMikdash is it allowed. Water wheel outside the Bet HaMikdash is not allowed. Why? Isn't because it makes a lot of noise as it's going around, and that's why it's a problem. So you see, it's a question to Rabbah. It's not making music. No, it's a different reason. Not because making noise, but rather because a water wheel like this is able to draw a lot of water. And if you have a lot of water, it's like, oh, what should I do with all this water? You're going to come to water your garden. Or if there's a ruin, a house that's dilapidated, and things start growing in it, and then it turns into a garden. So then you're going to water your garden because you have so much water. That's the reason why you can't use a water wheel. In the Bet HaMikdash, they'll be careful. They only use the water for things that are permitted. Okay, now a story based on that. Amemar, Shera lemimle begilgela b'mechoza. He lived in Mechoza, and they had a water wheel there, and he permitted the people there to use it to draw water. Amar, Maita Amar Gazuda Banan, Shema Yimale Liginato Lechurbato, Hacha Lagina Ika Velachurba Ika. He says, what's the reason why you can't use a water wheel? Because you might water your garden. We don't have any gardens here. It was like Brooklyn, right? They had only streets, and so we don't have any ruins. So no one's gonna use the water to water their garden. I don't have to worry about the gezerah. The gezerah does not apply in my case, and therefore he permitted the people in the city to draw water. Now what happened? Kevan deka hazadeka taru ba kitna asru lehu. But then people, because they had a lot of water, so they started soaking their flax in the water, and that is prohibited. And so then he says, okay, forget it. Now you're taking advantage of my leniency, and so it went back to being asur for them. Okay, but anyway, we were able to resolve all the questions about making noise versus making music. Halacha l'maaseh follows Rabbah that only making music is prohibited, right? And that's why not only playing instruments, but even clapping to a beat or dancing are all problematic on Shabbat. Whereas making noise generally is allowed. Although even that halacha has a remnant till nowadays. Some people won't use a knocker on a door because it makes a lot of noise. And you almost never see people clapping in applause. Technically, if you're clapping in applause, it's not to a rhythm, so it's just noise, right? That should be allowed, but you never see after the rabbi gives a sermon, you don't see people clap. Although that could be because they just don't like the sermon.
I had my uncle teach me when we were young that we clapped like this.
Right,
Like
exactly. You're right. So you clap like this, but that's, really if you're clapping to a beat, and so then this makes it better, right? But technically you could clap in applause because it's not making music.
uh-huh. Okay.
Right, but I think that you're right. The custom is not to clap at all, and
Yeah.
which is the ancient, the Tosefta halacha, not even clapping to scare away animals. So I think that halacha does continue as a customary practice.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, and I wrote a paper on this. I can send it in the chat later on this whole subject. Okay, umi be'er heker, and also you also can't use draw water with a water wheel from this heker well. My be'er heker, why is it called that? Amar Shmuel bor sheikru aleha devarim v'tiruha. They advanced many arguments and permitted. They had a lot of discussion about this, and so that's why it's called Be'er Heker, the one that was discussed a lot. All right, that doesn't seem to fit though, because the following beraita metibe lo kol habarot hakarot hitiru ela zo bilvad. So there's many barot that are called hakarot, right? And all of them are prohibited except for this one particular one. So if it's talking about a particular one that they argued about, why are they saying except for this one? Which sounds like there are lots of others. So that's not why it's called that. Rather means one that has come from fresh water. In other words, not from a cistern like the others were, that's filled up with rainwater and just sits there, but rather this comes from a spring that's always flowing, and you're drawing up water from that underground spring. So that's why it's called, as it says in the pasuk in Yirmiyah, kehakir, which means fresh water. Okay. Gufa, lo kol barot hakarot itiru ela zo bilbad, uchshalu bnei hagola chanu aleha, unviim shebenehem itiru lahen. So when it says that we're going to requote that what we just mentioned, but in full. So they only allowed one certain heker of these heker wells when the people from exile from Bavel were coming to Eretz Israel. They encamped by it and they were discussing it because not only that year but all the time. And anyone from Bavel who's coming to Eretz Israel and they're traveling, they're going to have to stop there. So they discussed it, and the prophets that were among them said it's permitted. right? So back then, when they first came, they had the last of the prophets, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, and they permitted it. But then we say, no, it wasn't the prophets, but rather they had a customary practice. I think this is interesting that they're backtracking and saying, no, it's not the prophets, but rather they had an ancient custom, perhaps because we have a general rule that a prophet is not authorized to make a halacha, right? They can admonish the people, they can inspire the people, I can teach them morals, but only Moshe Rabbeinu is authorized to legislate. Prophecy, other prophets cannot legislate, and therefore, no, it's not the Nevi'im that legislated, but rather it's the people who, in their practice, they transmit traditions from their forefathers, and so they remembered that this is the halacha, and they did it. Okay, good. And next Mishnah, Sheretz. שנמצא במקדש כהן מוציאו בהם ינו שלא להשהות את הטומאה. דיבר רבי יוחנן ben Beroka. So all of a sudden, let's say on Shabbat, the Kohen is walking around and he sees a dead, creepy crawly, a dead rat, which is one of the 8 shadatzim, which is an avat tum'ah. So it's not good. You don't want to have something that's tameh in the Beit HaMikdash. You got to get it out of there. So he has to act quickly. So what's the nearest thing he has? He has a belt, right? So he takes off or sash. He takes off his belt and he uses it to pick up the dead mouse and take it out, even though he can't touch it himself, because then he'll become tameh and he can't even be there if it's tameh. So that's a problem. But if you touch it with the belt will become tameh, which is not so good. But at least it will protect him and he'll be able to get it out very quickly. That's the first opinion of Yochanan. No, he shouldn't do that. He should go and look for wooden prongs, and he can hold it with the prong and take it out that way. And that way, so wooden prong is not susceptible to tumah. That won't become tameh. He doesn't have to use his belt. The problem is that'll take a few more minutes. He has to go, where's the prongs? In the other drawer down there. Okay, if he has to get it, there's going to be tumah there a little bit longer. So that's the question. What's better? To create something a little bit more tumah but save on time, or to save the time but or take a little bit more time and not increase the tumah. I'm imagining, like in the Beit HaMikdash, instead of fire extinguishers on the wall, they had wooden prongs, emergency, just in case. Okay, מהיכן מוציאין אותו מן ההיכל ומן העולם ובין העולם למזבח, דיבר רבי שמעון בן ננס. So on Shabbat, during the week you take it out no matter where it was, but on Shabbat we want to limit it. So on Shabbat, if it's in the hechal, we need a picture here. Here. This is the hechal itself, right? Here's the ulam. So if it's in any of these areas, certainly you take it out. Also, he adds, if it's in this area, the outdoor area that's between the ulam and the mizbeach, so that's right in front, kind of right facing the kodesh and kodesh kodashim, and this entire area, if you see one on Shabbat, you take it out. But in the green area here, in other words, it's also outdoors, part of the same courtyard, so it has all the same halacha. But if it's beyond, in front of the mizbeach, it's not so much right in front of the kodesh, and so it's not so bad. So in that case, you don't take it out. You leave it there until after Shabbat. That's the first opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Nanas. Rabbi Akiva says, Omer, Kol makom shechavin al zidono karet v'ashigato chatat, misham motzin oto. Ushar kol mekomot kofin alav pesach ter. He says, any place that you would be chayav karet, if you bring in tum'ah, if you walk in there by being while tameh, then you have to take it out of that area, and that includes the entire courtyard. Okay, so he's saying you have to take it out of all the entire area. If it's not in that area, so according to the Rabbi Akiva, in other words, it would include also the green area and maybe even more, or maybe just the green area. And any other place where it's not, you don't have that chiyuv, then you just cover it on Shabbat, and you so that it contains, and then you take it out after Shabbat. Okay, good. Where am I? And Rabbi Shimon finally, Omer, Makom she'tiru lecha chachamim, meshelecha natnu lecha. Shelo yitiru lecha ela mishum shivut. This is the end of the Mishnah of the whole Masechet. So this statement is not related to what we just said, but rather it's related to something else, which we'll talk about. Anyway, Rabbi Shimon says, whatever the rabbis permitted for you, they permitted for you of your own. In other words, they're only giving back to you something that you already had. So that the things that the rabbis say this is allowed, it's only because it's mutar midoraita. The rabbis came and made an isur, and then they said, oh, there's an exception. So they're not giving you something; they're giving you back something, right? It's it's like if the government takes $100 in taxes and then they tax rebate, they give you back $10, right? Okay, they're giving you back your own money. So that's how you should think of these halachot, like these various halachot regarding Bet Hamikdash that you're allowed to do the Rabbanan. And furthermore, shivut, because they only permitted things that were shivut, in other words, lesser category of the Rabbanan in the first place. So that's the only thing that is permitted. Only if they made it asur the Rabbanan, then they can make exceptions and say it's allowed mid Rabbanan. Okay, we'll see what that applies to. All right, Gemara. Amar Rav Tavi bar Kisna Amar Shemuel hamachnis temeh sheres lamikdash hayav sheres asmo patur. Okay, it's very strange halacha that if someone brings on purpose or by mistake, I don't know, he brings a sheretz into the Bet Hamikdash. He brings a dead mouse into the Bet Hamikdash. That person is chayav. But if the person is, but the creepy, if he brings just the carcass, then he's exempt. Sorry, let me say that again. Someone who brings something that became tameh because it touched a dead mouse, then the person is chayav. But if he brings the dead mouse itself, it's okay. Right, so which is kind of paradoxical. The dead mouse itself is okay, but if the dead mouse touched, a utensil, and they bring that utensil in, then it's a problem. Or food, then that's a problem. So it's paradoxical. But what is the reason? My tama has a pasuk for it. Amar kerami zachar v'nekeba teshalechu mi sheyesh lo tahora b'mikveh yaseh sheres she'en lo tahora. Because pasuk in Bimidbar, which talks about sending out zav because they're tameh, it says zachar and nekeva, meaning a person. And what's interesting about a person? A person can become tahor, goes to the mikveh and becomes tahor, and also other things, utensils, they can become tahor. Whereas a sheretz cannot become tahor. Nothing that you can't, even if you put a sheretz into a mikveh, it remains tameh. And so therefore, the only prohibition of being in the mikdash is something that itself is like a person and can become tahor. So, although obviously you don't want to have the dead mouse in the Bet Hamikdash because it's making other things tameh, but there's no prohibition in and of itself. Okay. Lema mesaya le mizachar v'nekeba teshalechu perat dekli cheres. Or maybe we have another brayta that can support the statement that Shemuel just said, because here says that a kli cheres is also excluded from this prohibition. The kli cheres, that's tameh. Midibre Rabbi Yosef Galili. So kli cheres, one of the aspects of an earthenware vessel, is that cannot become tameh by putting into a mikveh. The only way to make it kosher is to break it. So you see that, therefore, it's similar. Is that the reason? Because it's the same as dead mouse and earthenware vessels both cannot become tahor in the mikveh, and so that would support it, right? No. Those could be a different reason. Earthenware vessels have a different aspect in that they cannot receive the highest level of tumah, avatuma, right? So they're stringent in one sense, but also lenient in another sense. They can never get that high level of tumah, and therefore they're not included in this prohibition because they're never going to be that tameh. Okay, so that's no help there. Lema ketanaeh. So let's say, is this issue, can we match up this machloket with what the machloket of the Tanaim? Let's see how it works. Sheres hanimsa b'mikdash כהן מוציאו בהמיינו, שלא שעות את הטומאה, דיבר רבי יוחנן בן ברוקה, זה המשנה, ויהודה אומר, בשבט של עץ מוציאו שלא רבות את הטומאה. All right, so Rabbi Yochanan said you should take it out immediately using your belt, even though you're going to make the belt tameh. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says take it out, wait to find the wood prongs and then take it out with that. So the one who says don't wait at all, in other words, take it out with your belt, he must think that there's a problem to have the dead mouse in the Bet HaMikdash, and so they're violating the prohibition every second it's there, and therefore better to take it out right away, even if it will involve making the belt tameh. And the other opinion says, no, wait to get the wooden tongs, because you don't want to increase more tum'ah. He must think that's okay to wait a few seconds, because we don't have a prohibition. He agrees with Shemuel that there's no specific prohibition for the mouse to be there. So that would seem to match up, right? Not necessarily. Lo, dekula ama chayav. No, everybody agrees that you violate a prohibition by having the dead mouse there every second. But the question is, what's better, or rather, what's worse? Leaving tumah there for a longer time, or increasing more items that will be tameh. So it's just a toss-up of how the tumah is going to stay. Okay. Ela kehane tanae. Oh, so let's try again. We can match it up with a different machloket of Tanaim. Titnan mechan motziin oto. Where do we take it out from? And we saw two opinions there. The Shimon ben Anas, right, said you only take it out from the altar to the ulam and hechal. In other words, only most of it, but not all of it. And the Akiva says you take it out from the entire courtyard. So what's the essence of, what's the root of their argument? So the first opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Anas said there's no prohibition to have the dead mouse there, and therefore if it's in a spot in the hechal, right in front of the hechal, it's really not nice. It's very disrespectful. So you got to get it out. But if it's beyond the mizbeach, then leave it there, right? Because there's no prohibition. And Rabbi Akiva says you got to get it out, and no matter where it is, that must be Rabbi Akiva, right? And he must think that there is a prohibition for the mouse to be there. So that would seem to match up. Okay, and actually we leave that. That does seem indeed seem to match up well. Okay, good. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Ushnehem mikra echad darshu. Even though they have machloket, they both derive it from the same pasuk in Divrei Yamim. Vayavo hakohanim lifnima bet Hashem letaher. This is when King Chizkiah came to cleanse the Bet HaMikdash. His father had brought in all kinds of idolatry and tum'ah, and so we had to clean out the Bet HaMikdash. So who did that cleaning out? The Kohanim. They came in and they cleaned it out. They bring everything that was indoors, they took it out to the courtyard. And in the courtyard, they passed it to the Leviim, and the Leviim then took it out like a conveyor belt. They took it out to the Kidron River and threw it in the river. Okay, good. So now what do you see? That the transfer happened in the middle of the courtyard. Why did they transfer it in the middle of the courtyard? Morsavar mide ashtani ba'azara balviim tuma ba'azara leka. So the first opinion, Bisham ben Anas, he thinks that there's the problem of having the tumah only reaches till the mizbeach and not beyond that. So therefore, the Kohanim took it to that part, and after that, it wasn't not a problem anymore. Then the Levim could take over. That's why you see that they transferred it in the middle of the courtyard. That shows that that's the cutoff line. And the Akiva was saying, no, different reason. The Kohanim carried it to the point where the Leviim were not allowed to walk. Leviim are not allowed to walk inside, and so the Kohanim had to take it out. But as soon as the Leviim can be there, better for the Kohanim not to have to become tameh. And so it's asur. You have to take it out of the entire courtyard, but the Leviim could do that. So if the Leviim could do that, then make the transfer in the middle of the courtyard and not make the Kohanim carry it all the way to the end of the courtyard. Okay, so they both can explain that pasuk in their way. All right. Tanu Rabbanan hakol nichnasin b'echal livnot etaken lo siyat hatuma mitzvah ba'kohanim. Okay, this is always an interesting question. Who changes the light bulbs and sweeps out and cleans things in the Bet HaMikdash? Right? There's things that need to be done that are not official Bet HaMikdash service. The service has to be with kohanim, but the plumber needs to come, and how's he going to get there? So it said. So this Baraita says everyone's allowed to come in and out, to fix things or to remove tum'ah. You got the exterminator. But it's mitzvah. If you can get a plumber as a kohen, exterminator as a kohen, then that's better. But not necessarily. Im en sham kohanim nichnasim leviim, en sham leviim nichnasim Yisraelim, idi ve'idi tehorin in temein la. So that's the pecking order. Kohanim then leviim Yisrael. But whoever comes in has to be tahor to be able to come in to go into the Bet HaMikdash, no matter who they are. Okay, so that's the first opinion. Amar Rav Yehuna, Rav Kahana Messiah Kahane. Rav Kahana had a different interpretation, and Rav Kahana himself was a Kohen. So Rav Yehuna is trying to, as a mnemonic, remembering, right? Rav Kahana interpreted in a way that favors Kohanim, because just now we said that Levi and Israel could do it, and so Rav Kahana says differently. The Taneh Rav Kahana, mitoch shenemad ach el haparochet lo yavo. יכול לא יהיו כהנים בעלי מומים נכנסים בין העולם למזבח לעשות ריקועי פחים. So since it says that only the Kohen can go inside and nobody else, so I might have thought that a Kohen who has a mum that is not allowed to go in, even to fix things, to manufacture the plates and the gold and other things. So that I might have thought that a Kohen who's a Ba'amum cannot go in at all. Tamud Domar Ach Chilek. So the word Ach in the beginning of the Pasuk makes a distinction. And so therefore, here's a new pecking order that he teaches. Mitzvah B'Temimim. If you need something that needs fixing in the Bet HaMikdash, it's got to be a Kohen. But the best is if it's a Kohen who has no blemish. Second best, a Kohen who has a blemish. Kohen who has a blemish cannot serve and do anything for the Bet HaMikdash service, but he is allowed to go and make repairs. Mitzvah b'tehorim, and sham tehorim nechnasim tamein. Better if the Kohen is tahor. If nobody's tahor, then you can get someone tameh. Idi ve'idi kohanim in Yisraelim la. But no matter what, has to be only a Kohen, but not a Yisrael. So in other words, only Kohanim can go in. So that's where you see here that Rav Kahana said he interpreted the order of who can go in. Even according to him, even a Kohen who's Tameh and has a mum, it would be better, right, than a Yisrael who's Tahor. Okay. Ibaya lehu, question. Tameh u'ba'al mum, ezo mehen nichnas. So I have one Kohen who's Tameh, but he's by no blemish. Another Kohen who has a blemish, but he's Tahor. Which one should go in? Which one's better? Rav Chia bar Asher amar Rav Tameh nichnas deha ishtereh ba'avodat tzibur. It says the one that's Tameh should go in because in general he can do the service. Actually, he can't do it while he's tameh. But there's another halacha, it's actually a very important halacha. If everyone is tameh, then kohanim can do the service while they're tameh. Right. In other words, if most people are tahor, then the kohen you have to get a tahor one. But if they there's no paraduma, everybody's tameh, then the kohanim are allowed to do the service. Which means, according to this, technically nowadays everybody's tameh. So technically, kohanim could go and make a korban pesach. Or something like that, and they don't actually have to be tahor. A lot of people think the reason why we can't build the Bet HaMikdash is because everybody's tameh, or reason why we can't have sacrifices. But actually, there could be a way. Okay. Anyway, to be Elazar Omer, Baal Mum Nichnas, Da Ishtere B'Achilat Kodashim. Rabbi Elazar says, no, better the blemished person is better, because even someone with a blemish, although he cannot make the sacrifice, he is allowed to eat from the holy food himself, right? Once it's done, whereas someone's tameh cannot eat from the holy food. So each one has a benefit that the other one doesn't have. Okay, let's just at least do half of the next paragraph, so we'll be almost at the end. Rabbi Shimon Omed, right? So Rabbi Shimon said that when the sages say something is permitted, they're only giving back to you something that was already permitted, because they're the ones that said it was asur in the first place. So what is he talking about? He's not talking about this halacha that we just said here. Rabbi Shimon hecha ka'eh hatam ka'eh ditnan. He's talking about something way back in the fourth perek of Eruvin, where we said Misha ichshich chus latchum afilu ama achat lo yikanes. If someone got stuck outside of Techum Shabbat, and even if he's just one amma away, there's 2,001 amot outside, he cannot enter the city, right? Even that's the Tanakama. Says, sorry, right? That's the borderline. Even one off is no good. However, the Bishimon afilu 15 amma yikanes. If you're even 15 amot or less from the border, you can come into the city. Why? Because the surveyors, when they go and make the boundary markers, in the first place, they're not exactly precise. They leave a little wiggle room, because when they measure, they're holding the rope, and so they're not including the place where they hold the rope. And so actually, of the 2,000 amot, they put the boundary marker 15 amot closer than it needs to be, and therefore, if you find yourself just 1, 2, 3 amot away, it's okay, because they allowed that wiggle room. That's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. So Tanakama says you can't, and he says you can. That's what he was talking about when he said, when they permitted it to you, it's yours. Actually, you have those 2,000 amot. He's not saying anything extra. He's giving you back what was already yours. All right, I'm not going to read the next two paragraphs, but so that we have something left for tomorrow, but I'll just say outside what it means when it says that the rabbis did not permit anything except something that is shivut, that's only a rabbinic decree. So what was he talking about? So the previous Mishnah says that if a harp breaks, you can tie the knot. And Rabbi Shimon is the one that said there, no, don't make a knot, because that's a permanent knot, it would be a sumidoraita, but rather only make a loop, because a loop would be midrabanan. So you see that he's of the opinion that you should not violate Shabbat, even as a hechsher mitzvah, even something that's a preparation for mitzvah in the Bet HaMikdash, you should not violate something that's doraita, but rather only something that is the rabbanan. And so we'll stop here and look forward to completing the last lines and beginning Masechet Pesachim. Baruch Adonai Adonai.